far as the overall world economy is concerned, we're getting deeper into the Greater Depression. And I call it the Greater Depression because it's going to be longer lasting and different from the unpleasantness of 1929 to 1946. So that's the bad news. The good news is that we're entering a commodities bull market. As you know, gold is $3,300 or so dollars an ounce. So that's been absolutely wonderful. But the gold stocks have not really moved. They're moving now, but not the way they have in the past. If gold stocks go like they have in the past, they'll go 10 to 1, which they've done 5 times over the last 50 years. So that's going to happen. Silver stocks, very bullish. Uranium stocks, very bullish. Commodities, they're all cheap. I'm very bullish. So that's some good news and bad news. I don't think that people pay enough attention to what these stupid central banks and governments are really doing. I mean, yes, everybody talks about government policy and central bank policy, but they don't acknowledge the fact that the institution of government itself is pure destructive. It's a vehicle for organized theft, and people that work, I shouldn't say work, are employed by governments, and central banks are engaged in a criminal enterprise. So people treat the policies and the announcements of governments and central banks like they were worthwhile listening to. They're about as worthwhile listening to the pronouncements of your local mafia boss. So that's something that people don't analyze correctly or give the right moral credit to, I should say. Well, the last depression was largely caused, it has its seeds in the creation of central banks all around the world. In the case of the United States, the Federal Reserve was created in 1913, followed by World War I, which the central bank financed. And they kept expanding the money supply throughout the roaring 20s. That's why the 20s roared, because of the extra money creation. It wound up with the collapse in 1929 to 1933. Yes, I say that this is going to be worse because these central banks are much more powerful than they were back then. And there's much more debt on all levels than there was back then. That debt's going to have to be liquidated one way or another. And it's so large, it's going to be catastrophic in nature. And in addition to that, governments and their taxes are much, much more onerous than they were back then. So I don't see any way of avoiding a real depression. Now we have to define a depression. The best general definition is a period of time when most people's standard of living goes down significantly. I think this is the case for middle-class people all over the world at this point. The average guy who lives in a country, if he wants to get ahead, you have to produce more than you consume and save the difference. That's how you build capital and become wealthy. But when your currency is inflated, it becomes foolish to save it. Here in Argentina, where I am, this is why Argentines are poverty-stricken, because you can't save. If you can save the peso to start with, it's inflated away on you. So they're on a treadmill going nowhere. So yes, inflation is a tax. It's one of the worst things that government does to its people. It's amazing to me that people actually think the government is their friend. It's their enemy. For many years, I've been involved in mining stocks, and I have to excuse myself when I talk to legitimate conventional investors because mining is a horrible business. It's a 19th century choo-choo train business. You spend millions of dollars looking for a deposit, and then if you find it, you spend tens of millions developing it. And then if it looks economic, you spend hundreds of millions. It's a crazy business, stupid business. So why am I in the mining business? Because it's a very volatile business, and very few people are in it or care about it or look at it, which means that there are lots of anomalies and occasionally excellent bargains in it. So bad business, but an excellent area for good speculations. And of course, I look at oil and gas. They're different. Much better businesses, many more people are in them. I look at agricultural commodities as well. So that's where I concentrate on those things, frankly. Everybody knows that the Chinese symbol for crisis is a combination for the symbols for danger and opportunity. So I guess if you're looking for the opportunity, it helps to be aware of the danger. The problem for most investors today is if they want to go into the stock market, and I'm talking about the U.S. stock market mainly, is at all-time highs by any conventional measure price-earnings ratio, price-to-book value ratio, dividend yield. It's at about the most expensive level in history. And polls show that the average American is very bullish and invested in the stock market. That's not a good time to be in the stock market. So I'm not looking for opportunities there, except on finding short sales, which interest me a lot. I like to find a company with bad management, even criminal management, that has promoted their stock to ridiculous levels, and shorting the stock can be a sure thing. So that's one thing that I look out for in addition to commodity speculations. Real estate. I own a lot of real estate, and I like real estate because it can't be inflated away. And it's a good place to sequester money so that it's illiquid and you can't spend it. At least it's an asset that you have. But generally speaking, I'm not crazy about real estate because in the Western world anyway, it floats on a sea of debt. In the US, in most places in the West, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, a lot of places in Europe, you can't buy a house, you can't sell a house unless you can get a mortgage. So the whole real estate market floats on a sea of debt. That makes it unstable. So I'm cautious about real estate too. But best opportunities? I think it's in small mining stocks today, frankly. I mean, this is something I've been involved in for 50 years, and sometimes they're the worst place in the world to be. Other times the best place, because they're extremely volatile. They're more volatile than biotech stocks. They're more volatile than computer or internet stocks. Right now, they're really cheap. Now is a great time to own mining stocks. When I speculate in small mining stocks, I almost always like to buy the stocks through private placements. So the money goes directly to the company. And since these companies are always raising money, because most of them don't have any income, but they have a lot of expenses, general overhead and prospecting and developing and drilling and all this type of thing. So they're always raising money. So when I see a company that I like and they're doing a financing, I can usually get the shares at a discount to the market, number one, and number two, a warrant, so that after typically a 4-month hold period, I get 2-for-1 leverage on my money. So that's how I typically buy them. I'm old enough to have been buying gold for about 50 years, and I use it as a savings vehicle. So that's treated me really well because from my first investment, it's gone up not quite 100 times. So that's better than saving dollars. But that's the problem too. It's that in the past, relative to a meal in a restaurant or relative to your house or relative to anything, gold was very, very cheap. But that's not true anymore. Now, gold is reasonably priced relative to all those. It's not a bargain anymore. So I can't beat the drum for gold anymore as a good speculation from that point of view. However, because all of these governments are actually going crazy right before our eyes, and because at some point they're going to need to use something for international money, and they're not going to trust each other's fiat currencies. Why should anybody trust the US government and its dollar? I think the whole world is going to go back to gold again. If it does, and it will, gold is going to have to be $30,000 or $40,000 an ounce. First of all, I've always been a fan of uranium because I'm a fan of nuclear power. Nuclear power is the safest and the cheapest and the cleanest form of mass power generation. And I think the world's opinion is changing, and they can see that wind and solar, they're nice for special applications or, for your cabin in the woods or something like that. But they're completely insane for mass power generation. And the Europeans especially have been really stupid this way, putting huge amounts of capital into these foolish forms of mass power generation. Nuclear is the answer. And I think even as we speak, the world is starting to turn to nuclear. The Chinese and the Indians are building and planning scores of nuclear plants. Under the Trump regime, one of the good things about Trump, nuclear is having a renaissance in the US. So I'm bullish on nuclear and very bullish on uranium. And owning a lot of uranium stocks, frankly, starting with Cameco, which is the big one, and going down from there. I've been to over 150 countries, so I'm very conscious of the changes that happen in countries and the directions in which they're going. And my advice on this, I don't care where you live. I don't care what nationality you are. It's that you should have a second country with a second passport. And if you can afford it, a second home. Because things can change rapidly. And I can give you lots of examples where countries changed 180 degrees within the space of 1 year. The world is becoming a much more unstable place. So that's one thing that everybody should do. And if you can't afford a second home, or you can't afford to go out and get a second passport, well, then shame on you. Do something about that. Which countries are best? I think it should be Argentina's very high on your list. Also Uruguay, Chile, beautiful country, very interesting geographically. Paraguay, all of these South American countries. Each of them are as different as the countries in Europe. But the key is make sure you have at least 2 passports. That's number one.